President Emmanuel Macron has laid out his vision for the EU in his first speech to MEPs since France took over the presidency of the bloc on January the 1st. With escalating tensions between Ukraine and Russia amid fears of a Russian invasion, Macron urged the EU to arm itself in order to defend its interests. He says the EU should hold what he called frank dialogue with Moscow and seek a political solution to the ongoing crisis. Brussels was excluded from recent US-Russia talks. Macron says a more security-focused bloc would give them a seat at the negotiating table.
These next few weeks must lead to a European proposal to build a new security and stability pact. We must build it between Europeans before we share it with our allies within NATO and then offer it up for negotiation with Russia.
Let's bring in our correspondent Grégoire Lurie, who is at the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Good evening, Greg. Good to see you. So, with the Russians at the gate of Ukraine, Emmanuel Macron is asking for a new strategic rearmament of Europe. How did that resonate with MEPs?
Well, Stefan, you can imagine MEPs have followed very closely the statement by Emmanuel Macron. I'm joined here today with David McAllister, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee from the EPP. Mr. McAllister, what was your reaction to Emmanuel Macron saying that Europe should prepare for strategic rearmament?
Well, I was in the plenary today here in Strasbourg witnessing what the French president had to say, and President Macron outlined the priorities of the French presidency for this first half of 2022, and I welcome that one of the top priorities of the French presidency is to move forward on European foreign policy, but also on security and defence. And for instance, the summit in March in Paris on EU defence policy will be an important step forward. And I do hope that under the French presidency, the strategic compass can be adopted so that we kind of have a white book, a roadmap, how to make concrete steps towards a European defence union.
What's the position of the European Parliament on defence issues?
For many years, the European Parliament has been calling for a more active and a strengthened common foreign and security policy and a common security and defence policy. The European Union is a global payer, and the European Union has shown, for instance, when it comes to trade, how strong we are when we get our act together. But we are a soft power, and that is good. We are proud of being a soft power, but we also need hard power capabilities. That's why we need to move on in creating a European defence union. We need much closer cooperation on foreign affairs and especially on security and defence. But one thing is important for me to underline: NATO is the cornerstone of European security, and all our activities should not be doubling NATO capabilities or being in competition with NATO. It's about strengthening the European pillar within the NATO framework. So perhaps you can sum it up in saying we want to remain transatlantic, we want to stay transatlantic, but on the other hand, we want to become increasingly also European.
Is France got some allies on this strategic autonomy that Paris is claiming for?
I think there's a consensus among the 27 EU member states that we have to move on, if you want to call it strategic autonomy or strategic sovereignty. What all these terms have in common is that Europe needs to strengthen its capability to act. And the developments in 2021 were once again a wake-up call. We have to do more for our own security and defence, in close cooperation with our transatlantic partners, with the United States of America, Canada and the United Kingdom.
Emmanuel Macron has targeted Russia in particular. This is the major threat for the EU?
Well, what we're seeing in the moment is the biggest threat to European security in decades. We as a European Union want to have good relations with Russia, but in the moment they are extremely challenged, and Moscow is responsible for this. We want to see our cooperation with Russia based on the fundamental principles of European security architecture. That means the Helsinki Final Act, the Paris Charter, to respect the territorial sovereignty and integrity of all European countries. We are in favor of good neighbourly relations and a good rules-based cooperation respecting international law. The Kremlin and President Putin is questioning this, and that's why we are in favor of continued dialogue and diplomacy with Russia. But on the other hand, we have to be very clear that we stand in solidarity with Ukraine, that we cannot accept bullying or even the threatening of a military aggression against a sovereign country. And President Putin needs to know that a military aggression against Ukraine would have enormous economic consequences for Moscow.
Well, thank you very much, David McAllister. That was the position from what we could hear from the European Parliament after Emmanuel Macron's statement on security issues.